Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's a really big one. Today we're going to be talking about the top 10 worst hit songs of the 2010s. I'm not sure that in my time critiquing music I've created anything that required this much work and contemplation. Because in any given year, you get a tight, short list of songs to pull from and you can rely upon a more immediate reaction of joy or repulsion. But considering an entire decade's actually a little bit different. Mostly because your criterion for any given year has to evolve a little bit, especially considering it's a worst of list. And a big factor, it's the passage of time. Because on the one hand, you might be predisposed to throw an avalanche of venom at the stuff you hate just in the past couple of years because the emotions are so much closer to the forefront. But on the other hand, the songs that wound up recurrent in multiple formats and still blow ass to this very day from nearly a decade ago might have a bit of a longer fuse there. And that's not to excuse a factor that isn't normally considered in pulling from just one year. Longevity. This is where a lot of songs that are just boringly shitty in a not particularly interesting way, they will fall off the radar because they wind up being forgotten. Because songs that might reach your list in the past for sheer absence of good, they don't tend to stick in the cultural zeitgeist in comparison with the memorably awful that inspire some real emotion in me. And as much as I really hate to admit this, long-running artist popularity can be a bit of a factor as well. Because a bad song, a bad album, that can kill a career. Now, of course, there are exceptions, not to spoil anything, but hi, Chris Brown. But if the one-off bad song doesn't become a cultural staple, it doesn't just carry the same weight compared to the bad songs delivered by artists who never fucking go away. And it's also important to highlight that trends, they will change with time too. What might have been in the aftermath of a really bad craze a decade ago might be seen more fondly now. Or conversely, if a bad trend has kicked off and still lingers, that can taint a song too. Hell, sometimes it just takes time for certain styles of music to grow on you. I won't claim to be out in front and getting all the new trends and styles from the jump. Sometimes that happens. Finally, and this is just as important for me, as a critic, I've changed and evolved as well. Music taste is never static, and what I might have hated 8 years ago might have changed or shifted with time. And just because a song might have topped one of my lists half a decade ago doesn't mean that it's guaranteed a high spot on this list. Hell, while all my picks are pulled from my year-end worst hit songs list, how I might dislike any one year also evolves and changes. And as such, there is such a thing as really good and really bad years for Billboard. So don't be surprised if 1 or 2 years have more representation than the others. That's all I'm saying. Alright, so y'all got the rules? Well, let's get this started. I'm only sticking with the top 10 worst hit songs of the decade because I really don't want to torture myself that much. But that doesn't mean we're not getting a considerable number of dishonorable mentions scattered amidst the lot.
Tonight is bottoms up. Throw it on down, rock this quiet little country town.
You know, I've been willing to defend bro country. I've said there are peaks and valleys within the genre that even despite the problems of really formulaic, list-driven songwriting and oversold macho posturing and frankly embarrassing hip-hop integration, that if you've got bright enough melodies and you got a little bit of charisma, you can make the occasional fun song. It basically made Jake Owen's career. Whereas if you want the absolute fucking dregs of the subgenre, you can recruit Brantley Gilbert with his biggest hit of Bottoms Up, a down-tuned, miserable turd of a song that has all of Jason Aldean's anti-charisma with the vocal register of a Billie Eilish ripoff. It's a party song where nobody's having any fun. There's no palpable groove to speak of, and a lot of the production sounds ripped from the early 2000s post-grunge scene, of which I'm fairly certain is the sad remainder of Brantley Gilbert's remaining fan base. Nashville country had a particularly atrocious year in 2014, and while we are thankfully long past that, Bottoms Up remains the ugly, misshapen standard bearer. Fuck this song. I can argue this song was the moment that made those giving a pass to Train's comeback snap awake and question what on earth they were doing with their lives. I mean, shame it didn't come on an album earlier, but Drive By, it became one of those songs where people just gave its limp, overwritten jauntiness looks of aghast horror what they had unleashed, where Pat Monahan's Love Gone Viral rampaged across adult alternative radio. But again, what makes Drive By so appalling isn't the slapdash songwriting or the screechy delivery or the canned production. It's a song where the one night stand was so bad, the woman targeted, she ended up skipping town. And upon seeing a doppelganger that he thinks is her, Pat Monahan makes one of the most appallingly disingenuous swings at reviving the romance that might as well come with leisure suits, negging, and magic tricks. You can't even frame it as a sad sack anti-love song that can be kind of charming in its shittiness, because Pat Monahan is not Alex Cameron, and his nonchalance reflects more laziness than desperation. So yeah, you know what? Go grab the hefty bags after all. This belongs in the trash.
Well, I won't give up on us, even if the skies get rough.
I delivered a lengthy monologue on how much I just despise this song for being an emotionally manipulative Nixon recruitment speech disguised as a post-breakup song when I made my worst of 2012 list, and I actually got a fair amount of pushback against that because, oh come on, it's not that bad, and you're overthinking this too much, and Jason Mraz's sincerity redeems it, and thus the clumsy hackery can be excused. And you know what, maybe all that's true, as I really tried to revisit the song with fresh ears for this list, and I can intellectualize all of that critique. And then the paroxysms of unbridled rage returned at the line, God knows we're worth it, and I wanted to set Jason Mraz on fire again for his execrable decline into bull-faced dippity-doo schlock that might as well get shipped with the Williams-Sonoma catalog. The only concession I am making, it's missing the list proper. Even then I'm being generous.
Baby, watch your step now, better have your boots on, kick the dust up. Back it on up, fill your cup up.
When critics talk about how much they hate bro country, Luke Bryan really does come up a lot, and so does the single most iconic song of that era from him, That's My Kinda Night. And yet, it's the sobby bro country critic who knows that the lead-off single from his next album, Kick the Dust Up, is far worse. The same mugging delivery, but this time with the target at the city folks paying for the expensive drinks at the club, when you could be off on a rusty tailgate in a dusty cornfield in the middle of fucking nowhere for your party. You know, this coming from one of Nashville's biggest label acts who would flip-flop to the whole metropolitan bro trend a few singles later, because you really can't leave all those tourists staggering through Music Row clubs paying $10 to $15 for drinks waiting. And at least That's My Kinda Night thought to have a groove instead of that really painful banjo loop, the hideous synth, the atrocious drum mixing, and a post-chorus that might as well shoot the song in the head. Take it from somebody who has Luke Bryan fans in his immediate family and who have gone to see him live. They don't even like this turd. And for good fucking reason. Okay, so that's a good healthy start. Let's get this list going with number 10. Okay, so the first very important observation I'm going to make here is that pure stupidity doesn't guarantee a song is gonna make this list. Going back through the worst of the 2010s, it does prove that there are many different flavors of insipid dumbassery, and for me, they're more just faintly embarrassing than outright infuriating. Hell, I can even like my fair share of stupid music. I'm not gonna go out on that ledge to condemn a song. But when you pair the stupidity with the oversold annoyance, and then you make the song an adult alternative radio staple for a fucking decade.
Hey, soul sister, ain't that Mr. on the radio? Stereo, the way you move ain't fair, you know.
Somehow I wound up talking about Train twice this early. And I didn't want to, believe me. I still think Drops of Jupiter is a real gem, and I'd still argue that Pat Monahan is a more interesting and thoughtful songwriter than he can be given credit. And even on Hey Soul Sister against the chirpy ukuleles and his caterwauling, there is a perverse sort of logic to the string of disconnected 80s references. I mean, it's not like the rest of that decade didn't furiously masturbate over the 80s. Pat Monahan was just first to the circle jerk, but he also gave the hand away. He told us he was trying to write a sex song like In Excess, and wound up making one of the most profoundly unsexy staples of department stores in history. Hell, if it wasn't for vulture capitalists blaming millennials for it, I'd say this song was responsible for the collapse of so many chains. And yet we all know the horrible lines that are damn near mimetic and seared into our brains, because this song will never goddamn die, and belted out by Pat Monahan with the shameless conviction that everything he is saying is pure gold, which is so oversold in its blissful idiocy that you can almost hear the appeal before we get the game show love connection, and the chest hair, and being so gangsta and so thug. At least Afternoon Delight didn't really survive the 70s. This lasted an entire decade. Let's not make it 2. Number 9. Okay, so to anyone with working ears, the last song was a mistake to pretty much everyone but Train, who rode that song to a revived career and a lot of diminishing returns for the next 10 years. But let's flip the script to something that was less than 6 months later. Everybody, even the notoriously rapacious music industry, realized it was a mistake and had to be memory holed as quickly as possible to hide out from how complicit they really were. But some of us, yeah, we never forget.
Pussy got that wet, got that drip, got that super soak. I hit that, she a Fifi, honey, Kiki, she eat my dick like it's free.
So one thing I've noticed with music critics in the latter half of the 2010s is that in the face of ravenous stan armies, they tend to pull some of their punches and sweep certain glaring issues under the rug in the face of the clickbait payday. And thus it was kind of perversely fascinating for me on the outside looking in, watching all those in the industry to rode the Tekashi 6ix9ine bandwagon to the bank will then distance themselves or turn on the reckless, abusive, snitching meme once it became clear that his time was very much up. Now, thankfully, I never had that problem, because as hard as 6ix9ine went, he was so painfully one-dimensional and not even interesting in his overcompensating masturbatory fantasies. You know, the sort of character the industry eats alive and then shoves on stage with the increasingly desperate Nicki Minaj for the sexual picture that nobody in their right mind wanted. The entire song has this cloying, sticky miasma to it, one artist stripped of any assertive personality while remaining thoroughly unappealing, and the other desperately hoping her presence would galvanize a mismanaged album rollout that when the deluxe edition of the album dropped, this song was taken off. And Murder Beats is also here, cause a rhyme scheme this basic is where you want your credit opposite, alongside your worst ever production to date, where every name associated with wants nothing to do with it now. And I include the fans in that. 6ix9ine fans didn't want their SoundCloud waifu so neutered, and Nicki's fans didn't want her opposite this creep. And less than 2 years later, nobody's really going back to Fifi anymore. Guess in some cases history does come around, especially when it's this trash. Number 8. Whereas for this one, yeah, it still has defenders for now, but in following a rapacious music industry stripping a once interesting artist down to the most basic elements, where the ickiness is replaced with a bone-deep feeling of disgust and disappointment.
Hey, look, ma, I made it. Hey, look, ma, I made it.
You know, it's been a while since I've seen a backlash cycle for a song come and go so quickly. Nobody really seemed to care one way or another about this made a couple of lists for the worst hits of 2019, and yet before any deep-seated anger really kicked in, some folks came around for arguments to embrace it, and the backlash to the backlash gave Brendan Urie a cheap exit strategy. But if anything, that makes it worse, because now Brendan Urie has no clear indication that this sort of faux self-aware garbage is a horrible idea. And yet it's a song that only really could come from Panic at the Disco. Cause yeah, it is transparently artificial, and self-aware, and theatrical. All the dodges the band has always given itself with the veneer of self-conscious irony. But instead of leveraging those factors in order to elevate itself, it's using all the tropes cited by people who hate pop music to repeatedly stab itself in the face. It's parody without a coherent punchline, and when paired with production that screams of cheap, overcompressed incompetence, it proves that even if it wants to be satirical, it's gonna make listening to it a real fucking chore. It's a song that transparently hates itself, and a lot of the audience that might enjoy it unironically. And I have no respect for pop that embraces cheap phoniness to make a point about about the industry, only then to prove exactly how much Brendan Urie is going to become another soulless cog in it, especially when over the past couple of years, that's proven to be true. This is Brendan Urie's self-conscious defense when it almost seems like he's trying to convince himself to buy in. Hell, at least when AJR did it, they seem unaware of their own imbecilic impulse. Brendan Urie, he just happened to make it all unlistenable in a very similar way. Only he knows exactly what he's doing. Congratulations on cheapening your legacy, dude. This isn't crazy. And it's not genius either. But before we get to the next example of that, let's knock through a few more dishonorable mentions, shall we?
Wake up with your girlfriend. Yeah, yeah, 'cause I'm bored. You can hit it in the morning. Yeah, yeah, like it's yours.
So believe it or not, there aren't that many songs that made this list on pure disappointment alone. An artist's legacy shifts and evolves with time, and being let down can be a very transitional emotion. But I'm not sure there's a transition to as damaging and worthless as what might come to her career ahead as Break Up With Your Girlfriend, I'm Bored. The closing track of Ariana Grande's Thank You Next, comfortably the worst song she's ever made, and one that really kind of taints everything around her. By setting up its undercoat to minimalism as a closing track, she leans into veneers of capriciousness which actively sours the raw emotional journey she tried to follow, and then tries to flame its spoiled petulance as depth by extension. And what's truly galling is that on an album that's trying so damn hard to frame it as rough-edged and thrown together, this song's a moment of calculation that's not even sold properly. For as mildly repulsive as Seven Rings' deflective rich girl posturing was, this is the natural extension, and considerably worse because it can't even commit to it properly, especially as Ariana's writing and delivery convey way more investment than she probably intended. It's a jumble failure of a song that only succeeds in being generally unlistenable for me. Can't stand it. Next.
I'm upset. 50,000 on my head is disrespect. So offended that I had to double check.
Yeah, there was no way we'd be making one of these lists without Drake and what is easily the biggest miscalculation of his entire career. And what's so shocking about I'm Upset is how no part of it really works. Drake tries to sound imperious and dismissive and upset, but he just sounds constipated and leaning into the worst sort of pettiness, leaving himself open to the sort of devastating attack from Pusha T that was only days away from unleashing. It's Drake at his ugliest and arguably his most misogynist, but an utterly bungled representation of it that's got none of the ruthless cool he would eventually harness to get back where he was. For a song that's all about being offended by how much he was undervalued, it only inadvertently painted the picture of a man who didn't show the emotional capacity to value anyone or anything, especially the women who have remained his greatest defenders. What's the worst of all is that while Drake has built his career humanizing his worst behavior, this was the point that the artistry felt the most pitiful. Not even an attempt to appeal to women. I can't even imagine what guy finds sympathy for Drake's pissy paranoia, which is why the video is an overdone Degrassi tribute featuring Jay and Silent Bob, as a sort of wildly oversold deflection, a sort of desperate attempt to staunch the bleeding that would fail spectacularly. I don't even think he thinks this works. Now, In My Feelings would be far more successful in winning back that audience, but I'm Upset, the biggest L Drake has ever taken, and one I don't think I will ever forget.
Niggas been counting me out, I'm counting my bullets, I'm loading my clips, I'm writing down names, I'm making a list, I'm checking it twice and I'm getting them hit.
Yeah, I'm not about to apologize or backtrack on this one, and the fact that I didn't get nearly as much backlash as I was expecting on this pick says a lot. But the larger truth is that for all the expectations J. Cole and his fans have set up for him, he's just consistently fallen short compared to the field, and Middle Child is the hatefully hypocritical victory lap taken for coasting on mediocrity. A song that's trying to take on all comers for some sort of high that has the feel of a guy who's trying to start a bar fight where everyone else is just faintly embarrassed, especially his friends. But if anything, it's worse, because J. Cole is claiming the moral high ground that he not only doesn't have, but will flagrantly contradict in his own song, trying to be a unifier spanning old curmudgeonly rappers who are no longer relevant, and the unrepentant shitheads of the new school, all the while taking shots at Kanye's camp with a very obvious tribute to Drake. Some middle ground you're holding, Cole, especially given how with your embrace of not so subtle individualism socialist capitalism, all that empowerment sloganeering can feel increasingly hollow, especially when you tack it onto the confused mess of Revenge of the Dreamers 3 to serve as the next backdoor ego trip. And what's worst of all, you can so clearly tell that J. Cole is really spoiling for the fight that he just outright refuses to take. All that ego to bait conflict, place yourself on that throne, none of the real teeth to back it up. A feint without the follow-through. In other words, the same sort of contemptible attitude that ran through Hey Look My Made It. Knowing, rampant cowardice. Of all the songs on this list, this is the one that feels the most awkward to place here. Yeah, the production is still listless and undercooked. It's a product of a really bad debut album on Stoney, where Post Malone will yodel like somebody took a 9-iron to his nuts, with a sort of unchecked, naked hatred of this girl opposite increasingly pitiful flexing. Even with the excuse that it's supposed to sound really unpleasant, it's a thoroughly nauseating listen. But on another level, I can see the appeal of this sort of self-flagellating breakup song in trap and emo rap. And I would say that to its target audience, this probably would touch a raw nerve. I would say that, except when I saw Post Malone live at Reading Festival in 2018, I was in the pit for this song, desperately trying to protect the women I was with and hold back a howling mob of drunk, underage white boys bludgeoning everything that moves and hurling bottles of piss. You heard me correctly, for a song that's all about raw, confessional, sad boy whinging, all to a die-hard target audience that I don't even think radio focus testers could pull together. Their response was to form circle pits and spray urine. I'm not sure you can get a more concentrated example of failure if you tried. But okay, back to the list proper, number 7. So this is one of the oldest songs to make this list proper, and I feel like in the decade since 2010, some context might have been lost surrounding this artist's return with this song. After a horrific assault for which he only received a slap on the wrist, and a 2009 album that was so ruined by rampant artistic bankruptcy that I'm not even sure it needed Jay-Z's behind-the-scenes industry sabotage, you could argue his career was over. He was actively getting replaced. Better artists have been driven out of the music industry for less. But if there's one thing America loves, it's forgiving the unrepentant shithead assholes. Not when they apologize, but when they double down, thus bringing him the next tremendous wave of undeserved success.
I know you're mad, but so what? I wish you best of luck. Now I'm finna throw them deuces up.
I mean, spoiler alert, Chris Brown's gonna be on this list. A lot. He's comfortably one of the worst artists working in mainstream music to this day, and in the 2010s he put out a lot of garbage. But Deuces deserves a special place of dishonor, not just because of how Kevin McCall seemed to imply that Tina Turner was the aggressor in her abusive marriage, but how Chris Brown chose to lean into the worst of American impulses, and he was rewarded for it. It's not like Deuces is fun, or features a virtuoso rap performance, or has a decent tune or production. It's this miserable breakup song where she's all to blame, he's kicking her to the curb, and it's a mingled stench of laziness and misogyny just runs through all of it. And what's truly important is that I get the appeal of stuff like this. I've listened to the more self-aware Chris Brown fans over the past couple of years, especially since #MeToo, and the guys who acknowledge the toxicity go to Chris Brown as a mirror to confront their own rapacious demons. Better they get it out there. But with Deuces, there's 3 major problems with that. Number 1, it's not like there weren't male acts in R&B who confronted their own toxic demons with framing that wasn't inherent glorification. House of Balloons might have been a few months away, but Drake and Usher were right goddamn there. 2, maybe it's still really shitty to reward Chris Brown with cultural capital and Grammy wins in the next decade for this sort of project, for the album this was on, and Deuces, it's not even a good example of it. It's turgid, it's slow, it goes on way too long, and Tyga can't even keep the vibe consistent, so the song can't even deliver on its own bad promises. And thanks to that, we got Chris Brown for an entire goddamn decade. We'll be coming back to that. Number 6. I think the fact that I brought up cultural context in discussing Chris Brown might be considered a little gauche as a music critic, because of course the art's supposed to stand alone, death of the author, right? Well, yeah, putting aside how this context is only ever argued against when the song is actually being criticized, and the fact that any sort of intended toxic emotional weight that Deuces got was thanks to the Rihanna incident, that cultural context is going to be relevant for the next two songs here. Now, this is one that actually fell back a bit because careers imploded shortly afterwards, but if you want to highlight the moment where the steep downside of an entire song and cultural movement was really exposed...
Dear future husband, here's a few things you need to know if you wanna be my one and only all my life.
So, putting Meghan Trainor on this list, I mean, come on, she's an easy target, even with the new album that's out right now. It's shooting fish in an old-fashioned barrel that won't stop ripping off better songs with, like Chris Brown, a veneer of completely unearned arrogance. But at least Chris Brown knew he was wallowing in his own toxic shit, whereas Dear Future Husband is infernally convinced of the virtue in its regressive text and subtext, which is considerably worse. It gives me the same sick feeling in the pit of my gut I hear with Hey Look Ma, I Made It, and somebody who is subsuming into toxic established hierarchies rather than even trying to question them, but Meghan Trainor caricaturing herself in this sort of self-obsessed sitcom harridan with an idea of gender roles that wasn't even relevant in decades, along with a lingering sociopathic streak, somehow it just feels way worse. I mean, I'd call it a goddamn parody, except with the exposure of her larger discography. We all know it's true. Funny how Meghan Trainor and Brendan Urie are taking influence from the same broadly sketched 50s golden age of show business, where they're just wallowing in artifice to avoid any sort of deeper conversation and the implications and subtext and theme of their work, all while sounding so fucking pleased with themselves with a sleight of hand. And again, there's no parody here, and Meghan Trainor's flat delivery, you can tell she's absolutely convinced of her own ain't I a stinker sense of humor that makes her look considerably worse, especially opposite the very first example of an obvious parallel to a much better song melodically that this serves to bastardize. Apparently, she actually is married now to an actor who is one of the leads in the Spy Kids franchise. Congratulations to her, I guess. I only hope she grew the hell out of this, cause no. Number 5. And speaking of artists who I have to hope grew out of their own basic toxic insecurity, look, it seems like he's got bigger problems now, and I want to say he grew out of this, but man, if we're going to talk about a low point in a bad year that was among the worst possible additions to the culture at that time...
I know I can treat you better than he can, and any girl like you deserves a gentleman.
There aren't that many points on this list where I can point to an act and say, oh, thank God he's a lot better now. And let's be blunt, Shawn Mendes isn't exactly making great music, and I'm not sure he's really evolving much as an artist. But if we're going to talk about a straight nosedive into the worst single of his career, it really is Treat You Better. And what's so goddamn loathsome about it is how thoroughly basic it feels. Yes, stretching up the whole banality of evil, it's absolutely an overstatement, but a similar principle applies in reinforcing the most broad and stubborn stereotype of the nice guy, all while framing himself as the hero. Or at least he would if the song wasn't a desaturated clunker, where he's trying to sound aggrieved and winds up like somebody signing a vice grip on his nostrils. But that's the thing. The song isn't really framed or targeted at the nice guy set. There wasn't a wave of young guys who screamed at me on Instagram videos over my review of Illuminate. It was teenage girls. And yet that's worse, because the actual text and framing of the song isn't sensitive. It's not that kind. It's petulant and possessive and pissy and self-obsessed. Why is she wasting time with all her wasted crying? By the nine hells, even Adam Levine got this right on She Will Be Loved. The song is concentrated gaslighting, all about telling the girl to distrust her own feelings and emotions as it plays bait and switch with his own affection. And on some level, it could be considered almost as abusive. Kinda sickening that his predominant audience is teenage girls, especially in the fall of 2016 when this was at its biggest. Now, thankfully, Shawn Mendes is not making this anymore, but the fact that he did, yeah, you're still getting some of that side-eye. I know that's there, and how many views this has to this day, that ain't a good sign. Number 4. Now granted, a lot of the repugnant toxicity I've described, it's subtext more than outright text. Oh, it can be there, but it's more incidental. It doesn't quite run rampant. And I'll say this for Shawn Mendes and Meghan Trainor, at least on some level, they might think that their intentions are good. But on the flip side, you get a song where the intentions aren't good, and it's just flagrant how foul it all is, or it just leaves you questioning even further who the hell all of this is even for.
Long as my bitches love me, my bitches love me, my bitches love me. I could give a fuck by no hate as long as my bitches love me.
Let me be very blunt here. Starting around Rebirth, Lil Wayne had a stretch for about 5 to 7 years that featured some of absolutely excruciating music, especially compared to the standards that he set for himself in the mid-2000s, where even the fans started to actively recoil from this and add asterisks to that discography. Because smack in the middle of that, we got 2013's Love Me, otherwise known as Bitches Love Me, with Drake and Future setting the foundation for their own decade of making miserable music. But alongside Mike Will Made It, making another oily turd, this is Lil Wayne's show. And look, I've actually seen some defenses of I Am Not a Human Being and this song, highlighting how fearless Lil Wayne is in his creative promiscuity. But as someone who is absolutely not a prude, there's a very big difference between creative promiscuity and the rampant exploitation masquerading as the lowest form of adolescent wish fulfillment that we get here. Again, I'm asking, who the hell is this even for? What woman wants to hear that her pussy is a crater or that she's on a strict diet of dick? Even most of the submissives I know would pull back from that because Lil Wayne sounds like a lazy, sloppy asshole as he does it. And for guys, who wants to identify with a guy who's fucking everyone he wants to and those he doesn't for no reason? He doesn't even sound like he's having fun beyond the cheapest possible domination fantasy. And even then, there's this yawning pit of emptiness that fills this song, enhanced by the gooey synths and the leaden beat that I'd almost say would trigger existential horror at the worthlessness of such a nihilistic and hedonistic existence and all the bitches that love him for it. But nobody here's thinking that hard. And the fact that it was so successful and emblematic of so much of Lil Wayne's career, even to this day, to me, for a song that's trying to make you feel powerful by identifying with it, at the end you just feel kind of gross and really a little pathetic. But hey, when you're this rich and powerful, they just let you do it, right? Ew. But okay, before we get to the final three, let's get to a last of our dishonorable mentions, and we're gonna stay disgusting with...
They don't like to see you winning. They wanna see you in a penitentiary. I need me a little baby who gon' listen. Girl, I don't wanna be the one you again.
So, J. Cole, you still sure you want to be endorsing guys like this? You knew about this, right? A rapper who can barely stay on beat and whose delivery has the triple boons of sounding concussed with bad nasal congestion and half recovering from dental surgery. He's such a nakedly unlikable figure in his delivery that even if you want to praise the production, all off-kilter guitar, weedy flutes, and a rumbling trap groove that doesn't really match with the flow of any of it, you're still stuck with a rapper who actively sucks away any likability, half because of the flubbed and actively forced rhymes, but also because of how he frames his haters. You know, the people who might think that jail time is warranted for all the sexual assault charges. Putting aside the further conflation with the racial and political climate in the video, what might be more genuinely gross is that if you're trying to empathize with Kodak's come up, you still get a creep who makes awful shit puns, and then there's the infamous line, I get any girl I want, I don't gotta rape, with the subtextual real life implication that that was on the table. The increased horniness in the second verse, combined with the mother figure that suggests make good decisions and then kill people, it just all surrounds a song that is otherwise just bargain barrel flexing. It's a cut of rampant id that, like with Love Me, seems to actively attract the worst possible audience. Gross.
Boss niggas only, thick bitches only. I got my real niggas here by my side. Only.
Okay, how is it that against this skin-crawling, drippy mess of a posse cut, along with some horribly mangled percussion, that Chris Brown is the best part of it? And even then, he's trying to reinforce this weird exclusionary vibe. I have never understood in Flex songs why anyone would like it. It's like listening to songs where they're taking your girl. But that only emphasizes the industrial-grade awkwardness of this whole mess, where it's got the feel of walking in on a multi-partner kink session that's just about to fly off the rails, all centered around the conceit of all the presumptive sex that Nicki Minaj didn't have. I mean, I guess as a power trip for her, it could make sense, provided you get over that stupid duct tape line that she feels she has to explain to us, and all the stuttered bars and rhyming words themselves, and Lil Wayne might be pissing greatness like goldish yellow, but he's not even the worst part of this. Because, nope, that's Drake, who not only roundly humiliates himself with voyeuristic abandon, we get a front row experience into all of his horniness and how he brags about being friends with the late mayor of Toronto, Rob Ford. And if you know anything about that messy legacy of the Ford family, that's not a flex. Overall, only is the sort of humiliating posse cut that might explain why Drake, Lil Wayne, and Nicki Minaj are working together a lot less often these days. Just saying, if you had to go back to this...
Get it on. You got the healing that I want.
Okay, the last two dishonorable mentions are such easy targets, it might not even seem fair, but if there's a lingering stain on the legacies of Charlie Puth and Meghan Trainor that remains so thoroughly embarrassing to this day, it's their attempt to co-opt Marvin Gaye's name and sexual tension to make a WASP anthem for the ages. Now, I'll admit, I'm still really pissed off that Charlie Puth has justified the chorus of concentrated nonsense by comparing it to the boy band classic I Want It That Way by the Backstreet Boys, but at least that song had a strange sort of zen in its incomprehensibility that made it a classic. Here, you know exactly what Charlie Puth and Meghan Trainor are doing, and it feels like a sex song made by people who think they might have heard of sex, but aren't really sure it exists. They're sex skeptics. Again, we got lines like Karma Sutra Show and Tell, how Meghan Trainor describes herself as a dog without a bone. Ew. And how we get a bastardization of a Mercy Mercy Me reference to refer to someone crying out an orgasm, which might have been a thing 100 years ago, but sure as shit isn't now. But that's the other warped thing about Marvin Gaye, which seems to ignore the 70s soul of the titular artist and go for badly produced 50s doo-wop and modern pop trap. There's no coherence in the sensuality, and the juxtaposition just makes everyone feel really uncomfortable. I said this when this song made my worst list in 2015, that people who are afraid of their own genitals need music too, but I don't even think that's quite correct anymore. Hell, I'm almost convinced this was an intentional act of historical vandalism to sully the good name of Marvin Gaye and make sex sound so repulsive to the target audience that the human race stops procreating. And believe it or not, there's actually a song very similar right next to it to round out our dishonorable mentions.
Body like a back road, driving with my eyes closed. I know every curve like the back of my hand.
Sam Hunt has a new album dropping in 2020, 3 years after this misconceived offense to country, hip-hop, the human language, and the concept of sex to be released to the public, only for Music Row in Nashville to turn this into a genre staple of the 2010s. A song that compares a woman's body to a back road, opposite one of the worst guitar tunings of this decade, all for an artist whose misadventures surrounding his own DUI have made chunks of the song considerably stupider, if that was even possible. And just watch the industry make more hits coming off of this guy. Just fuck everything. Alright. Last couple here, we're really down to the wire, down to the end. Number 3. When you get to these entries, you almost become aware of their wrongness by how culture around them has changed. It's not just that there are atrocious pieces of music, even though they are, but that they've shifted and changed history for as rancid as they are. And I think even from the release, everyone realized this was a mistake. Let's explore it one last time. If you want to look at one of the worst years for both Rihanna and Chris Brown, you can make a credible argument that 2012 is it, both in terms of horrible albums and a collaboration that nobody asked for nor wanted. Let me make this abundantly clear. Even though I'd argue Rihanna giving Chris Brown some form of second chance sends all sorts of highly questionable messages about the cultural enablement of toxic masculinity, and giving Chris Brown yet another opportunity to revel in his public shittiness to persist through the rest of the 2010s, her forgiveness, her association with him, that's her business. But when she takes the unfinished wailing disaster of the original Birthday Cake interlude on her album for a remix with her former abuser, where the subtext of the song makes reference to what they did and how long he's been missing her body, I mean, restraining orders will do that, she's made it the business of the public. Because now there's art about it. It almost makes the other observations that it's an overmissed shrieking migraine of an underwritten song that's about the furthest thing from sexy kind of feel perfunctory. It's just as hideously anti-sex as Marvin Gaye was, now only the artist is doing it to herself and opening a back door for Chris Brown to slither back into the cultural conversation and never fucking leave. I highlighted in a previous list how this track seems to be actively erasing itself from existence. You won't find the remix on the majority of streaming platforms, and it sure as hell is not getting recurrent radio play. I even had a hard time finding a decent version of this on YouTube, but a song like this doesn't want to be forgotten. Not really. It's too much of a blaring aberration to slip out of memory that easily, hammering on repetition as much as possible to make any mention of cake fall apart in your mouth. It's a career intersection that's genuinely vile, and I can only imagine it exists as another step in Chris Brown's attempted rehabilitation / excuse parade that only really moved because people wanted to gawk at the transgression. And what that does say about those people, those who actually liked it, gotta wonder. Number 2. Truth is, I don't have to wonder though, because 6 years later, Chris Brown was back to do it all again, but somehow even worse. And well, I didn't hear anyone really defend Birthday Cake that much. Oh, I remember the defenders for this, because I was there.
I woke up in Chris Brown's body. So how this shit turned into Freaky Friday.
I can make the argument that this song is all the evidence I need that 2018 was a goddamn terrible year for the Hot 100, really just for society in general, because it's emblematic of so much perverse wrongness that I somehow get more material for my extended rants every time I go back to it. But I'm left circling back to the fact that when I tore this song a new one in 2018 on Billboard Breakdown at length, I faced more backlash for that than I ever had for any other song review I have ever done on that show. And I'm willing to make the argument that many of those defenders are still very much here, because Freaky Friday fits within that acceptable worldview so effectively. White boys want to pretend that they're black to co-opt the presumed cool they think that's been denied them, to say the N-word and have a big dick, all of it while ignoring the hideous implications that that is the only things the black experience minus any sort of systemic inequality outside of flimsy stereotypes, all the while pardoning an abuser of his controversial past, where the switch comes back through avid self-love. That's before the outro where Lil Dicky clearly thinks being Chris Brown, who I might add is a violent, coke-addicted abuser, is cooler than being Ed Sheeran, where in taking possession of a woman's body, he goes to start playing with it, where I don't recall consent coming up, and where somehow DJ Khaled walks away with the most dignity here. But what's truly wretched about songs like this is not only how they give all of it a pass without any clear thought, it thinks it's all funny. It's a light knee slapper at Lil Dicky co-opting his apparently vast network to make a totem to societal backlash. Because apparently anyone who might find this stereotypical, or controversial, or tedious, or just shit-garglingly unfunny gets the fun reply of, well, you triggered, bro. You triggered, bro. The only thing close to being passable here is the production. And even then, that emphasizes the sick wrongness of this thing. It's a song that wants to frame its punching down as the jaunty, family-friendly height of broad comedy, instead of the naked hackery that it is. So what's worse? Number 1. I'll admit that when I put together this list, I wound up a little bit surprised it was between this and Freaky Friday for the worst of the 2010s. But beyond the fact the actual instrumentation and music is just so much worse here, eventually it's circled back to as much as Freaky Friday is emblematic of the worst parts of culture in 2018, it's still a novelty song from a comedy rapper who will never have a real music career. Earth effectively euthanized that. And if that song had been a real hit, it might have actually missed this list for putting Lil Dicky's career out of its infant misery. Now this song, on the other hand, it was a part of the culture, and in a hideous way has persisted both in the underlying ideas and the careers entangled within, where, like Birthday Cake, it only seems to be remembered for the gross wrongness of its existence, But in reality, it got enough of a pass to survive, even though I've yet to find anyone who likes it or will defend it. But people have defended what it represents, and its trail is strewn all across this list. Though some of you don't even know it.
It's $1,000 pair of shoes, you don't even know it. It's $1,000 purple lane, you don't even know it.
The cannon.
Just $500,000 car, you don't even know it.
When I was revisiting this list and the worst hits of the 2010s, you don't even know it's the sort of bad song that just seems regular terrible, that wouldn't normally make the list. The spare squealing fart of the horn synth, the underweight percussion, the utter lack of momentum, the fact that all the vocals are left to linger a little too long in the mix. It's just a squittering shart of a song that seems like it would have been forgotten like every other forgettable slice of luxury rap that's more brand name than bar and has lingered across this decade. Maybe only remembered for the dumbass conceit that if you drink enough lean, your slurred enunciation of the title might reflect the hook. But that's before you get to the most obvious contradiction. So obvious that it doesn't often even come up. If you're telling me everything I don't even know, I now know it. Any air of mystery you might have, it's gone. And I somehow like you even less. And yet from there, look, nobody's ever cared about Rocco as an MC. This is his only hit, and Future is a bigger presence on the song than he is, although we'll come back to why that matters in a moment. No, the moment we all know this for, it's on Rick Ross, where after saying that he'd die over his Reeboks, he'd say, put a Molly in a girl's champagne and she won't even know it. Or taking her home to enjoy that, she won't know either. Let me make this abundantly clear. Rick Ross is not stupid. Even despite the apology tour where he feigned ignorance, that was date rape. And framing it with such dismissive casualness amidst a verse of flexes said way more about hip-hop in 2013 than I think even Rick Ross wanted to admit. So you would think, for such a stain on the genre, you would bury a song like this, that it wouldn't come up. That's not what happened, though. Rick Ross's verse might have been dropped from the radio, but that didn't mean a bunch of other rappers didn't rush in to take his place. Started with Wiz Khalifa, then going A$AP Rocky, then 2 Chainz, and then Lil Wayne remade it for the Dedication 5, and then Black Hippie, the supergroup out of TDE, remade it with both Schoolboy Q and Ab-Soul mocking the line, and Kendrick Lamar himself ending his verse saying that he's going to rape his competition. And that might well be as indicative of the ugly undercurrent in this song, and to this day, dismissive arrogance over bad production, where the most consistent theme is the blasé normalization of the language of rape for no reason. And even if you think I'm being hyperbolic with that description, you want to know what you don't even know has left in hip-hop for everyone involved, despite the misbegotten efforts of everyone to apparently save it? Rick Ross's solo career as a hitmaker never really recovered. Rocco has never had an extended career. This is his only real hit. But thanks to a messy legal fight with Future, it's led to Rocco getting a very meaty piece of so much of Future's success in the 2010s, which you can argue has led to Future shoveling out so many mediocre projects so quickly in order to recoup from that. Even some artists on their remixes haven't been spared, because outside of a scattered pop crossover success, A$AP Rocky, Wiz Khalifa, they've underperformed after 2013, and we all know the hit and miss mediocrity of Lil Wayne's 2010s. You've seen a lot of it on this list. And that's the truly reprehensible thing about this song. The worst hit of the 2010s. It was worthless, insipid garbage from the jump, and it tainted everything it touched. And hip-hop culture was for the worst trying to save it. My only hope is that the lessons were learned and we don't get anything like this in the 2020s. Let's make not knowing this the reality and move on. But yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know I kind of went off on a lot of this, but yeah, this makes me angry. And sometimes when you have to go through this much atrocious music, you get there. You got thoughts about what I could have missed? Comments down there below. I'm curious where you guys might fall on this. And hey, if you want to help support the channel, link to my Patreon right over there. But until then, let's put this all behind us. I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you.